Accountability, Fairness, and Equity Today, Safety Act.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Compass.
I move to adopt a resolution entitled, "A Resolution Regarding Illinois Safety, Accountability, Fairness, and Equity Today, Safety Act," and demand that state lawmakers own up to the mistakes they have made with the erroneously named Safety Act and get rid of the dangerous provisions of the Safety Act that hamper the ability of law enforcement to pursue and arrest offenders.
Second.
And I'm going to read the resolution first and make my comments first, and then the board can clean up anything that I've missed, because I've been dealing with this for quite some time, both legislatively and with other towns as well. But so a resolution supporting continued efforts to resolve public safety concerns with the Safety Act. Whereas the Village of Orland Park's mission is to provide services that ensure a high quality of life, sound fiscal management, and a dynamic business environment while creating an inclusive community that values diversity. And whereas providing a safe and secure community for all Orland Park residents and businesses is a focus of the village's priority plan. And whereas the Orland Park Police Department has been a leader in police training, policy and practice, accountability and transparency. And whereas the village values public engagement and stakeholder involvement to ensure all perspectives are considered in the development of legislation. And whereas on January 22nd, 2021, the Illinois Safety, Fairness, and Equity Today Act, Safety Act, was signed into law, which imposes significant changes impacting many aspects of criminal justice system, including pre-arrest diversion, policing, pre-trial sentencing, and corrections. And whereas the Safety Act was poorly drafted, nearly 800 pages, and passed in the middle of the night with little to no public debate. And whereas the state legislature has since made a handful of changes to the Safety Act, but there are still many provisions in the sweeping new law that are not workable and or create public safety concerns. And whereas the law abolishes cash bail as of January 1st, 2023, that all defendants charged with criminal acts should be released from custody without posting monetary bail, which will cause major public safety issues. And whereas violent offenders who are released on electronic monitoring and choose to violate the terms of their release have to be in violation for 48 hours before law enforcement can act. Whereas this denies crime victims their constitutional rights from Article 1, Section 8.1 of the Illinois Constitution, codified in the Rights of Crime Victims and Witnesses Act, that mandates that crime victims shall have the right to have their safety and that their families considered in denying or fixing the amount of bail, determining whether to release the defendant, and setting conditions of release after arrest and conviction. And whereas eliminating bail not only contradicts previously established and superior law, it places crime victims at a greater risk to be re-victimized and unnecessarily subjects witnesses to threats and intimidation. And whereas the law severely weakens the habitual crime statutes and three-strike sentencing laws, making it harder for our criminal justice system to keep repeat violent offenders off the streets and behind bars. And whereas the village worked with the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police to share public safety concerns about the Safety Act after its initial release and during consideration of subsequent trailer bills. And whereas the village supports certain elements of the Safety Act and has already implemented elements including body cameras and use of force training. And whereas the Safety Act contains several elements that impact the ability of the village to most effectively provide police services, including, but not limited to, unreasonably limiting the imposition of cash bail, unreasonably limiting police officers' discretion to make arrests, imposing unreasonable police certification and decertification standards, and mandating unreasonable custodial accommodations. And whereas this poorly drafted law containing ill-conceived directives would negatively affect the safety of every citizen of our community. And whereas we must stand with the men and women of law enforcement who consistently stand up for us, and we must not allow this law to stand as passed. And whereas there is an opportunity for legislators to continue to work with public safety representatives and all community stakeholders to further amend the Safety Act to address outstanding public safety concerns, and whereas a failure to remove these provisions or repeal the Safety Act prior to January 1st, 2023 will put the safety of law-abiding citizens and police officers at risk. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the President and Board of Trustees of the Village of Orland Park, Cook and Will Counties, Illinois, in exercise of its home rule authority as follows. The Village of Orland Park demands that the state legislators work with public safety representatives and all community stakeholders to fix remaining problems with the Safety Act, including but not limited to unreasonably limiting the imposition of cash bail, unreasonably limiting police officer discretion to make arrests, imposing unreasonable police certification and decertification standards, mandating unreasonable custodial accommodations, unreasonably allowing offenders to violate terms of their release, and violating victims' rights as outlined in Illinois law. The Village of Orland Park demands that these provisions are removed or that the Safety Act be repealed, prior to their implementation on January 1st, 2023. My comments on this: I can't even begin to tell you how dangerous this act is. First, it was passed in the middle of the night with 40 minutes to read an 800-page bill, which is unacceptable. As of January 1st, 2023, the following things will go into effect, and people need to be aware of this. It abolishes cash bail for almost every offense. This includes, but isn't limited to, kidnapping, armed robbery, second-degree murder, drug-induced homicide, aggravated DUI, threatening a public official, and aggravated fleeing and eluding. Offenders released on electronic monitoring have to be in violation for 48 hours before law enforcement can act. They could almost drive to Alaska before we can even look for them. It denies victims their constitutional rights. And keep this in mind, businesses and homeowners. Officers will no longer be able to remove trespassers from your residence or your businesses. Someone could decide to live in your shed, and all we can do is give them a ticket. You have to decide what level of force is required to remove them and whether or not it's legal. This is a massive threat to the residents of Orland Park, Cook County, and Illinois. I want to remind voters that several elected officials that will be on the ballot in Orland Park voted for this abomination. Senator Michael Hastings, Senator Emil Jones, and Representative Justin Slaughter all voted to put criminals ahead of the safety of law-abiding citizens and police. In particular, Senator Hastings, who personally told me that that he had a family and that this bill was horrible and there was no way he would vote for it. An outright lie that, in my opinion, disqualifies him to hold his office. I will gladly cast my vote for this resolution and demand the repeal of the Orwellian-named Safety Act. But it doesn't end here. There is currently a bill in front of the House to remove school resource officers from our schools, which means no resource officer at Sandburg High School. The city of Chicago has already done this. I personally don't want to see the city of Chicago become the standard for how we conduct public safety, because they've abandoned their police officers and abandoned their residents and created a war zone full of criminals. There's also a bill to make fentanyl a misdemeanor in this state. And I want to remind you that we have representatives that currently represent us or will represent us potentially in the federal government that voted to not extend the fentanyl ban federally. Fortunately, it passed, but there are people that actually believe that we shouldn't have a ban on fentanyl that currently represent our community. That's just absolutely unacceptable. It's like they won't stop until they destroy our communities and our society. We all need to take a stand against this. This is a very, very dangerous bill. I'll open up the comments to the floor.